everyone. Welcome to episode 203 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. And we're so excited to be back together again recording. We're doing the Zoom thing again this time. But as usual, we are happy to be starting an episode with thank yous. We're really grateful to have new Patreons almost every episode to thank. And this episode, thank you so much to Cynthia, Lynn, and Marcia for becoming new Patreon members.
Yes, we're so glad to have you as part of our community. Yesterday, I spent the day stuffing envelopes with bookmarks. So your bookmarks are on the way in the mail to you. If you go to our Patreon page, which you can find in the show notes, there are different tiers that you can join, and the different levels have different swag involved with them. So go check that out. We also offer to any paid patrons a monthly giveaway. And this month, the book is The End of the World is a Cul-de-sac by Louise Kennedy. This is a book of short stories. I talked about one a couple episodes ago. She's a fantastic writer that kind of came onto the scene with her debut novel at the age of 55. The novel was Trespasses, which I read and loved. So if you win this book, you're in for some great reading, and we are going to announce the winner on March 15th. So if you're not a patron yet, you have time. If you're already a patron, sit back and wait.
Yeah, good luck, everyone. We have an announcement, too, about our year of reading romance. Our Scarlet Summer bingo card was such a hit that we've created one for our year of reading romance.
Yeah, we put it in the newsletter in February. So if you are a newsletter subscriber, this is not news to you. You can download the card from that newsletter. We also are creating a new tab on the website for read-alongs. We're going to put things in reverse order, and there's going to be a list of all of our read-alongs there. And you can see the romance bingo card there as a link that is downloadable as a PDF.
Yeah, and it's a 5x5 bingo card with lots of different options of subcategories, of subgenres within the broader genre of romance. And we also have on there the 4-quarter picks. We also have different things like listen to a romance podcast. We spoke with a couple different romance experts, shared a draft of the bingo card with them and got some great feedback. So we like to think that we have a really solid range of subcategories to choose from to expand everyone's reading of romance. And I know some people out there are already huge romance readers, but even they may not read different subgenres. We also have on the bingo card that books, biblio adventures, and book-to-movie adaptations all qualify. So if you go to see a romance author at a bookstore, that qualifies as a biblio adventure. Say somebody like Jenna Miller, who's currently on tour, her books would qualify as LGBTQIA, YA, sports for her current one, which involves volleyball. I think it's a really fun bingo card, and I look forward to helping it expand my romance horizons.
Yeah, and we both already have a few squares knocked off, so we're going to post a picture. We would love to see your bingo cards in progress, but they are due December 31st. And anyone who participates will be eligible for the grand prize, which is a gift card to bookshop.org.
Yeah, and you could do one bingo or you could fill the whole card, whatever your schedule allows you to do.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see where we end up at the end of this year with our cards. Mm-hmm. So there's also some awards news you wanted to talk about, right?
Well, yeah, the Women's Prize for Fiction, the long list was just announced.
16 books, none of which have I read, which was so sad to me, but also cool. I mean, I say that, but it's also neat to see, of course, the 16 that they chose.
It really is. I mean, I haven't read them. Not surprising. You read more contemporary than I do, I guess. But I did see some of our friends on Instagram were surprised, like, wow, I haven't read any of these. So it's an exciting list.
Yeah.
I spent the morning looking through the entire list and downloading the free samples you can download for ebook versions. And out of the 16, there were only 4 that didn't have an ebook version that had a preview downloadable. So there's no way I could read 16 books by the time the short list is announced, with the other reading commitments I have. But I thought it would be fun to at least dip into each book and kind of get a taste for it. And then maybe when the short list is announced, read a few of those. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm probably going to wait for the short list. It feels less daunting to me, but I did really enjoy seeing the books that they chose. And also for the first time this year, they're doing a nonfiction list as well, which was actually released a few weeks ago. So we'll put links in the show notes to both of those lists.
Yeah, and I totally missed that. So I'm looking forward to checking out that nonfiction list.
Yeah, it's good. They choose great books.
Oh, yeah. And then there's another bit of news. There's a new publishing house that was just created by 3 publishing executives who've worked at a variety of different publishing houses. It's called Authors Equity. It's putting the author at the center. So there won't be advances, but the authors will get higher royalties. And one of the investors is Louise Penny. It's really cool. She's not planning on leaving her publisher, Minotaur. She's really happy with them. But like other authors who have invested in this, there's a couple other big names. She thinks it's a good time for innovation right now to try some different publishing models.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've also, we haven't asked this question of many people we've interviewed, but I've definitely heard from authors that there is a different kind of pressure to write when you've been given an advance. And so it makes you wonder if their preference is to have royalties. There's the obvious thing of if the book is a bestseller and has a long shelf life, you're going to make more money potentially. But I also wonder if by not doing advances, you have less pressure.
Yeah, a couple people have said that. You're writing that first book just for you. And you might have some pressures, obviously, self-imposed or otherwise. But then when you have the second book, if you have a contract and an advance, there's a very different kind of pressure.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it'll be fun to see what books they put out. We'll keep you all posted on that one.
Yeah. So, Emily, what are you currently reading?
I am reading a book that I heard about through our librarian, Linda Johnson, who keeps up our Goodreads shelf. And then I tried to get it, and it's impossible to get from the library because it's so popular. And then the gentleman caller was on a bike ride this weekend and sent me a picture of a little free library. And I did that thing you do with the pictures on your phone and blew it up. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's the book I've been looking for. And it's called The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. This is a big new release, and he does not have a basket on his bike. But he managed to get it home for me, and I had just finished with Indigo for our read along, so I was ready to start a new book, started it, and it was one of those where you're like, oh, if I could just put my life on hold for a week. It's definitely one of those that keeps you up past your bedtime. It takes place in Maine, up kind of around the Augusta, Maine area. The Frozen River refers to the Kennebunk River, and it's about a midwife in the late 1700s. I'm not going to say more right now. That's all I'm going to say, except that it's an incredible page turner. The other thing I will say is that I did get the chance to meet Ariel Lawhon at a Booktopia in Asheville, North Carolina. And I'll never forget her sitting in Malaprop's bookstore, which was the indie bookstore that Booktopia centered around. And she was there to discuss her debut, The Wife, the Maid, and the Mistress, which I really loved. She's a great historical fiction writer. Her novels always have a little bit of truth in them that she discloses in the back in an author note. And in this author note, in this book, she's like, stop. Do not read this author note until you are done reading the book. It will ruin the book for you.
Very good. Good. Yeah, I'm glad you did that.
But this is now her 6th novel. So since I saw her, that was probably a dozen years ago, she's been quite prolific. And again, that's called The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. Yay for little free libraries.
Yes. So I'm currently reading Jenna Miller's new release, We Got the Beat. This is lesbian YA romance. It's about Jordan Elliott, who is a fat, nerdy lesbian. She's a junior in high school, hoping to be named as an editor in the school paper she writes for. That's the very beginning of the book. They're sitting there waiting for the assignments for the year. And she gets a surprising assignment. And it kind of seems like it's a little bit of a friends turned enemy turned lovers kind of storyline, because her nemesis, Mackenzie West, humiliated her freshman year, and they've been enemies ever since. And Mackenzie is named the captain of the volleyball team, and Jordan has to cover not only the volleyball team, but she has to write a piece on the new captain of the volleyball team, Mackenzie West. So that's where I am now. I think I'm just in 3 chapters or so, and I'm enjoying it so much. It's like, her first novel, Out of Character, was so refreshing because they're a very diverse cast of characters. In that book, the main character had a really great relationship with her dad, and it's kind of the same in this book. Her parents are married. There's a mom and a dad, and they're married, but the parents are really different. The dad owns a comic book shop, so he hosts Dungeons and Dragons games. Otherwise, he's home, when she gets home from school, and they make dinner together and stuff. And the mom is there, but she works as a sales rep for something medical. I don't remember. And she's much more aggressive and competitive, but they have a great relationship and a good family unit for the most part. And I'm really looking forward to it because I love Jenna's humor and the snark, especially between all the friendship groups. That is We Got the Beat by Jenna Miller. More to come next episode.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to reading that one too. I'm also cooking out of the cookbook, The Cookie That Changed My Life, and more than 100 other classic cakes, cookies, muffins, and pies that will change yours. This is by Nancy Silverton with Carolynn Carreno. It's a funny cover. It's all writing because that's a long title. And then it has this tiny little peanut butter cookie in the corner. And the story behind this cookbook is that Nancy Silverton, who's a revered chef and has many cookbooks out, during the time of the pandemic, her husband brought home a peanut butter cookie from one of her friends' bakeries. And she was like, this is the best cookie I've ever eaten, but I want to make a better one. So she challenged herself to make an even better peanut butter cookie. And that is featured in the cookbook among many other recipes that she's trying to improve on. I found a recipe for graham crackers in here. I've always wanted to make a graham cracker. I did make it. It was a great recipe. The only complaint I have is that it was one of those where the ingredient list was on one page and then the instructions were on other pages. So I had to keep flipping back and forth, which annoyed me. And they had a nice picture of it on the facing page. And I was like, I wish they'd just put the picture on another page and put the ingredient list and the directions all on one page.
That's important to know. Like I don't cook that much, so it's really interesting to note that.
Yeah, it was just something that I was like, this is kind of annoying, and they could have made a different choice,
Yeah.
I'm also not great with a rolling pin, and there was a lot of rolling pins and measuring things, and I was like, I'm just going to do my best. And it all turned out. They were delicious, and I ended up putting ice cream in the middle and making ice cream sandwiches with them.
Yum.
Yeah, it was really good. I got this cookbook out of the library, and we'll probably try a few other recipes. Again, it's called The Cookie That Changed My Life by Nancy Silverton.
Awesome. And for those of you who don't know, Emily also has an Instagram account called Ingredient One and a Substack where she interviews authors who write about food and then also shares some great photos of Emily's cooking process and then the beautiful results. And there are some great photos on Ingredient One with those ice cream sandwiches between the graham crackers.
Thank you. Yes, it was fun. I wish I had more people to eat things. I need to get a group of those people.
Yeah, you need to start cooking for a team or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you and Laura were out of town when I was making those. Chris, what did you just read?
Well, I finished The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells. The subtitle is Investigations into a Forgotten Mystery Author by Rebecca Rego Barry. I listened to the audio version. I have to thank Libro for giving me an advanced listener copy. Wonderful, wonderful narration. I enjoyed it very much. But I had to get my hands on a physical copy. It just arrived. I'm so excited to have my hands on this. I'm showing it to Emily. And what I really enjoyed about this book is that it's a biography, It also reads like a detective novel almost, because she's investigating what happened to Carolyn Wells, who was so prolific and so popular in her day and wrote in so many different genres. What happened to her? Why don't we know her name today? And so each chapter explores some of this. Carolyn Wells was a librarian. That was her chosen career path. And then she got into humor writing, mystery writing, movie writing, and then she became a book collector. She collected a lot of Whitman, and she was a woman who also didn't marry until she was in her later 50s. She was from New Jersey originally and lived in her parents' home for most of her life. But when she married, she and her husband moved to New York City. So she then got to really be involved in the literary scene there. And he died within 2 years of their marriage. So she lived all of the rest of her life in the apartment where they lived. And it sounds like an amazing apartment in itself because it was housing many artists and writers. And there was actually a book written about the apartment complex that I don't remember the title right now, but we can maybe link in the show notes. It's a really fantastic book by Barry. And she gives a lot of different reasons why we don't know who Carolyn Wells is today, even though she was so prolific. Part of it being that she didn't name a literary executor. So there was no one to carry on her literary fame. She died. A lot of her stuff was left to her maid, who apparently was a really good friend. Some of her family members got some things, but most of her stuff was sold off, other than her Whitman collection, which she did donate to the Library of Congress. I had to get my hands on a physical copy to track down a lot of the notes and a lot of the references that were made. Also, I wanted to see the pictures, but there was also a lot of quoting of some of Carolyn's work within the audiobook, which I appreciated, so you can see her wit and her humor. So highly recommend this book, the book or the audio, The Vanishing of Carolyn Wells by Rebecca Rego Barry.
And do you think you're going to try to read something by Carolyn Wells now that you've read this book?
Yes, at least one by her. And the one I'll start with is Murder in the Bookshop, which was recently re-released by the Detective Club Crime Classics within that series in 2018. And it's also considered one of her best novels, but it's also considered one of the first bookstore Biblio mysteries.
Ooh, fun. That sounds perfect. Excellent. Well, I continued my short story reading, and, part of what inspired me to do this was looking at my Lucia Berlin short story collections. I have 3 of them. I chose the one that was the most recently published, called Evening in Paradise. This is one that was published because her other book became so popular, and that book was called A Manual for Cleaning Ladies. And A Manual for Cleaning Ladies was the book that came out posthumously. It was a huge runaway success. It became a New York Times top 10 book of the year, that sort of thing. When I was reading the foreword, which is a beautiful foreword by her son, and then reading some reviews of it, it's kind of that classic thing, Chris, where people are like, she was an overnight success after she died. And it was so sad to me because she was so prolific for so many years, and she was a beloved writing instructor. And I'm just so sad that she became famous after she died. Not the first author that has happened to.
Yeah, for sure.
The story that I read in here was called Itinerary. It's about a young woman who's going out into the world by airplane for the first time and traveling the world and visiting family. I didn't love it. And I've read that a lot of the stories in Evening in Paradise are semi-autobiographical. So it really read almost like a journal entry. It wasn't really short story-ish to me. Her writing is beautiful, but the story itself didn't capture me. So that was one of the stories I read. And then the other stories I read were out of a collection called BLISS MONTAGE by Ling Ma. And this is the book we got from the Wyndham Campbell Awards. Chris saw a giveaway that they were offering for some tote bags. And we ended up getting tote bags and some books to fill our tote bags. And this is one of them. I don't know how, but somehow I read 2 stories in here. I think I forgot that I had read one. So the 2 stories I read, one was called Los Angeles and one was called Office Hours. Wow. These are amazing stories. And someone, I think it might have been on our BookTube channel or on social media, had said, when I talked about this, when we received this book, said, that is a fantastic story collection. Whoever you are, you're right. The first story, Los Angeles, is about a woman living in a house with 3 wings. One of them is for her and her husband. One is for her children and their nannies. And one is for her 100 ex-boyfriends. It's a very interesting conceit, and it takes off from there. And then Office Hours is about a young woman who's a student, and she's visiting her professor in his office, and they become friends. And it turns out that he has a closet door that when you open, you can walk through it into another place. Very fascinating. Great writer. She's also the author of a book called Severance, which was her debut. So I'm going to be checking that out. And I did break my rule of reading more than one story in a collection. I think I'm going to have to read all of them in that collection.
That's great. Very good. Well, I read ETHAN FROME by Edith Wharton. We have talked before, other people have talked about how romance books are sometimes used as a palate cleanser. Well, I read a romance book and then I read ETHAN FROME, which is like the anti-romance book of American literature. It's one I had read before, like 25 years ago. I didn't remember much about it. And it's even more desolate and bleak than I remembered. Jeez Louise. It's just painful. It's about ETHAN FROME. At the beginning of the book, the narrator sees him and I think he's 52. And he has been in an accident. He has a scar on his head and a limp and not much use of his arm. The narrator is so curious about this man's background. So you get the background of ETHAN FROME. So the thing with Ethan is when he was 28, that's where the action goes back to. He's 28 years old. His parents have both died and he got called back from college. He had a year of college. He got called back and he's now in charge of the family farm and a mill that the family owned, and neither is producing. As his mom is dying, a woman who's, I think, a distant cousin comes to help nurse the mom. Winter is closing in as the mom dies, and Ethan kind of freaks out because he does not want to be there alone in the wintertime because it's so desolate. The writing is so beautiful at times, even though Wharton is writing about people who are so desperate. And it made me think about when we were visiting the Mount and talking with the librarian there about how Wharton was initially, her first writing experiences were as a poet. And so I was really keyed into that and some of her word choices. So let me just read 2 sentences from ETHAN FROME. This first one is about Ethan looking at his wife who's answered the door with an unshaded lamp in her face. And you know how that looks like with the flashlight, right? Yeah. In our day and age. So it says, she continued to stare at him, the flame of the unshaded lamp bringing out with microscopic cruelty the fretful lines of her face. I mean, microscopic cruelty, like, wow. And then much later on, there's a character who you find out that we've gotten some of the info about Ethan's past from her. Mrs. Hale is her name. This is a description of her. Mrs. Hale leaned forward, her pink wrinkles twinkling with benevolence. I just love that. Her pink wrinkles twinkling. There's such a contrast between the 2 women. I just love the idea of pink wrinkles twinkling. So great writing, depressing as hell. But I wanted to read it in part to prepare for reading another Edith Wharton novella.
Are you keeping that a secret or does it happen to be summer?
It does indeed happen to be summer, and I did happen to read it already. So the thing, should I just keep talking?
It's up to you.
Okay. How about you tell me about your next read, and then we can talk about summer.
Okay. That was a spoiler, y'all, because when we were at the Mount, people told us that summer is like what did they call it? The
hot ETHAN FROME.
The hot ETHAN FROME. That's right. So that's why I guessed that it wasn't that. I'd like to think that I know everything, but I don't. I finished Between Two Kingdoms, a memoir of life interrupted by Suleika Jaouad. I listened to this on audio, and it is narrated by Suleika. And this is a memoir about her time in her early 20s when she was diagnosed with leukemia. And the memoir starts before her diagnosis when she's feeling ill and she's living in Paris and no one can figure out what's wrong, to when she ends up coming home to New York and getting her diagnosis, and then takes you through the period of time when she's in hospital, has to get a bone marrow transplant. She has a romance that is really strong at the beginning of her illness and doesn't last through all of it. And then when she's done, which is years later, and they proclaim that she is in remission, she realizes she should go out into the world and live her life and be happy, but she doesn't know how. She spent these formative years in her life trying to survive, really. It's been very basic. And while she was trying to do that, her friends were building their careers and getting married and having families. So while she was ill, she had started a column in the New York Times called Life Interrupted. That was about her time experiencing this illness and literally having her life interrupted. And she received a lot of feedback from people in all walks of life from that. People who were literally down the hall in cancer treatment, and a guy that was on death row out in California, other people who had survived cancer, so many people. So what she decided to do, and what the last part of the memoir is about, is go on a road trip. And the first thing she needed to do was learn how to drive. She didn't know how to drive. So she learns how to drive, and before you know it, she sets off on this 15,000-mile road trip with her scrappy little dog that she had adopted late in her disease, which her doctors were very ambivalent about because she had to be so careful about germs. So she and her dog set off, and they go and they meet this cast of characters along the way that have written to her throughout this time in her life. It's really well written. She is a beautiful writer. And she also meets her now husband, John Batiste, which is what the documentary that's up for an Academy Award is about their life. It's called American Symphony. That's how I was introduced to Suleika, was through that documentary, and then scurried out and got a copy of this memoir. Really enjoyable listening experience. Again, it's called Between Two Kingdoms, a memoir of life interrupted by Suleika Jaouad.
All right. Well, as previously mentioned, I did read Summer by Edith Wharton. So just to look back at ETHAN FROME quickly, that was written in 1911. It was published in 1911. And some of the themes are like the forces of nature, duty, sacrifice, unfulfilled desires, unfulfilled life, the consequences of our choices, bad judgment. There's a love triangle. A lot is going on in ETHAN FROME. And then Summer, as Emily mentioned, is referred to as Edith Wharton's hot ETHAN FROME. And it's really funny because I don't know if I had romance on the brain, but I was thinking hot as in sexy.
Me too.
Right? Yeah. No, it's just about being in summertime.
Oh. That's the title. That totally makes sense.
Right. I know it does. Right. So that was kind of funny. So Summer, it's another brutal novella, very different in a lot of ways. It's another desolate novel. This one is about a young woman named Charity Royale, and it's set in a small New England town. She's the town librarian. I say that in quotation marks because she has no training. She doesn't read, and she hates books. So the 4 hours a week that she opens the library and is there is misery for her. But along comes a young man, one of the nephews of another well-off woman in town, who's an architect, who wants to study the local old buildings in the area. And things kind of take off from there. This novella, I was wondering, why has this not been read more or talked about more? You know, you always hear about ETHAN FROME and some of Edith Wharton's other big hits. And I think it's because this novel deals with abortion.
Mm.
Yeah, so Summer, wow, I could see how these two go together because they have this theme of being really dissatisfied with your life and not being able to get out. Both Ethan and Charity at different times think about where they can go and what they could do. And then the final conclusion is they don't have money to do anything.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed that it wasn't about romance. I thought for sure it was when they told us that too. It never occurred to me because ETHAN FROME takes place in the winter and summer. It's hot. It's not what I thought they meant.
I mean, there is a love story with Charity and someone, but I won't go into all of that. Yeah. But it was painful to read. Like ETHAN FROME, you felt claustrophobic, even though there were moments of beautiful landscape descriptions. So you had that openness in nature. Mm-hmm. In both books, nature is a place of refuge and comfort. Even if you're freezing or sweating, there's still beauty there that can nurture you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, these lives are harsh. Mm. Yeah. But I felt more for Charity because I felt like she was kind of screwed from the very beginning. And in some ways, I feel like ETHAN just makes some really bad choices out of desperation, but they're still choices. But I guess so does Charity. We'll see. One reason I'm reading Summer now is because we had that wonderful adventure at the Mount, and also because I'm going to be having a conversation with Sean the Book Maniac and some other friends on his channel soon about Summer.
Oh, cool. Nice.
I recommend both, and I recommend reading them side by side.
In that order? Would you do it in that order again?
I would, mainly because it's chronological order. One came out in 1911 and one in 1917. So a part of me was thinking about Wharton's development of her style and the enhancement of her writing skills between those, 6 years or so.
Cool. I read Finlay Donovan Rolls the Dice by Elle Cosimano. This is the fourth book in the Finlay Donovan series, which I have devoured as each book came out. Thank you to Minotaur Books for sending us an advanced reader copy, but this is a finished copy. The book just dropped this week. So if you're interested, it's available now. The other books in the series in order are Finlay Donovan is Killing It, Finlay Donovan Knocks Him Dead, Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun. All of them are about Finlay Donovan. She is a divorced mother with 2 young children. She has a somewhat ambivalent relationship with her ex-husband who still loves her, but screwed up. So she has no interest in getting back with him. But they are co-parenting. She is also parenting with a live-in nanny whose name is Vero, who is an adult who has a backstory that's fun and interesting and has developed through these 4 novels as well. And they always seem to be getting in trouble, the 2 of them, with dead people, none of whom they killed. This one is called Finlay Donovan Rolls the Dice because they end up at a casino in Atlantic City, and that's where the whole novel takes place. Vero had gotten herself in a little trouble with money, and the Russian mob became a part of it. So they're back together trying to hide dead people. Finlay also happens to be dating a detective who doesn't know that she's involved in any of these things, which makes it fun. It's very light reading, pure enjoyment, lots of laughter, lots of little kid antics, but not so much in this book. There's a little bit with her kids, but for the most part, she's not taking care of her kids, and her ex-husband is. And I like that she did that with this novel because that's the truth of how children should be raised. It takes both parents, or many parents if there are step parents and other guardians involved. So that's about all I want to say about it. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it was my favorite of the 4 novels, but it did hold up as pleasurable and just a fun ride and a nice palate cleanser. Again, it's called Finlay Donovan Rolls the Dice by Elle Cosimano, and she is on book tour now. So if any of you are fans of hers, I will put a link to the show notes to her website and her tour dates.
Well, the next thing that I read is Indigo.
Me too.
You too?
Yay. Yeah, and we had a Zoom conversation with readers about it. This is our first quarter read-along choice for our year of reading romance.
Yes. I have to say, I'm really glad we chose this book. We wanted to go back to one that was a little bit earlier in time, but not so far back that there would be a lot of rape posing as romance or things like that. Beverly Jenkins published this book in 1996. And it was her 3rd novel, I believe.
Yes.
It was one of the first novels that featured as the primary love interest two Black characters.
Right. And also that featured the main protagonist in the novel, whose name is Hester and is also referred to by the nickname Indigo, which is where the title comes from, who has very dark skin, and her love interest is light-skinned. And that was unusual back in 1996 as well, when this book came out.
Right. It is set during the pre-Civil War years in Michigan. And Hester lives in a house on property that was owned, I think, initially by her grandparents' generation, who were free Blacks. The novel starts out with 2 letters that were written by her father, talking about how he has allowed himself to be sold into slavery because he loved this woman, and that was the only way to be with her. And they have a child who turns out to be Hester, and the sister is able to track down young Hester because of something, a way that they marked her, and it had nothing to do with Indigo at that time. But then Hester is returned to her ancestral family home in Michigan, where she spends her growing up years and becomes a very important station on the Underground Railroad.
Right. Very good description. Yes.
Okay. All right. Good.
Yes.
I was glad I got that. I was trying to really piece things together for listeners who maybe haven't read it yet and are curious.
Yeah, and we're going to try not to do too many spoilers. This might be a little spoilery. We'll try not to get too carried away with that.
I mean, for our quarterly read-alongs, we do sometimes have spoilers. So
yes,
if you don't want any spoilers, maybe pause, but we'll do our best. Yeah.
So as someone who's part of the Underground Railroad, one night, an injured man is brought to her home that needs a little caretaking.
Yes, he's been badly beaten.
Right. And he goes by the name Black Daniel.
Yeah, he's the real legend on the Underground Railroad as a man who goes in and helps steal slaves. He kidnaps enslaved people to take them on the road to freedom. And he was caught in a situation and beaten. And no one knows who he is other than Black Daniel. That's all you know about him. And he's a strapping man, although his face is badly beaten. You can't really tell that he's very handsome at first, but he has a great physique. And as Hester nurses him back to health, well, from early on, you see that he is kind of an arrogant, entitled, I'm going to do what I want to do kind of man.
Right. And she is not really having it. She's not putting up with him. You know, she's feeding him and nursing him, but also kind of an independent woman that's very clear about how she feels about his behavior.
Right. And she's somebody who has handled a bunch of people who've been coming through her secret room that she has for escaping enslaved people. I'm sure she's dealt with a ton of different types of people. Right. So she is not having it, as Emily said. But, you know, this, in terms of subgenres, this covers a lot of different ground in some ways. But I think the main trope is the enemies to lovers storyline.
Right. And historical romance.
Historical romance, right.
It's American history, and there's a lot of history in here. I learned a lot from this novel. It's during the time of the Fugitive Slave Act, which was a terrible, terrible part of history. And that's how Black Daniel gets injured, because he is beaten by somebody who is trying to capture slaves and bring them back down to the South, looking for the reward or the payment that they get for capturing slaves. And they would capture people who were free and had been free for a long time or always free.
Right. And I think sometimes it might be harder for contemporary people to understand that you have papers saying that you are a free Black person, right? And it's a piece of paper that could easily be burned and just taken away from you. There might be notarized copies somewhere else. Hester does have a notarized copy at the sheriff's office, and the sheriff happens to be a white man who can be trusted, because for her, I mean, anyway, she can trust him because he was best friends with her dad. And so they have that connection. But just to think that that is the only thing that is documenting your freedom, and somebody could just take it away, and then somebody can claim it's forged. These people who are trying to entrap people could hire others to be witnesses and saying yes, that's her. So there's that constant threat for everyone. And that white people at the time, too, could be prosecuted for helping runaway slaves.
Right.
So it was one of those laws that was passed that really helped fuel the flames of anti-slavery sentiment across the country.
Yeah. And Hester had been enslaved as a young child and had worked in the South dyeing cotton with indigo, and her hands were stained. And that's where the title of the book comes, because Galen, who is the true name of Black Daniel and becomes the love interest for Hester after she's nursed him back to health, calls her Indigo as a nickname and a pet name. That's partly because she tries to hide her blue hands, her blue stained hands, and he thinks that they're not something that she should be ashamed of.
Yeah.
That was something I didn't know anything about. I didn't know about indigo and that being part of the work of enslaved people in the South.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good example of things you can learn through historical fiction.
Yeah.
And I think some of our listeners have debunked that she probably would not have had stained hands anymore since she was just a child, and that was many years ago. It probably would have faded. But I think that's one of those character choice that you just have to go with. Because I think it is. I think the point is more about this is something that enslaved people did and how it marked their bodies as enslaved people versus realism that her hands could still be stained all those years later when she wasn't doing that work for very long.
Right. I don't think that's the point personally to nitpick at details like that, but I understand when it might bother some readers.
Well, yeah, because it doesn't take much to take you out of a story. And I know there have been some really silly things that I've put a book aside for, but it's just like, I just can't.
Right.
So that is one of the things. And then the love interest, Galen, who is this, Black Daniel, who is infamous. He happens to be quite the millionaire/billionaire. His family comes from a long line of Creoles in Louisiana. And so his family has never been enslaved, and he's wealthy.
Right. I'm just going to read from the novel. It says, Galen was part of the Louisiana Creoles. They were known as I don't speak French, so I'm going to butcher this, but gens de couleur libre, free people of color. Their ancestry embraced most of the European races that came to America's shores, but it was the African blood in their veins which tied them to the rest of the Blacks in America. And he had a lot of money. He owned ships. His family had wealth.
Yeah, extreme wealth. So there's that other subgenre of the millionaire/billionaire. One of the things I was fascinated with was I did identify some Gothic elements within the story, like in Hester's home, which is, again, a station on the Underground Railroad. Her ancestors had built in escape hatches into every room, secret panels so that you can escape. And Gothic bells went off in my head thinking like, oh, it's like a creepy castle. And then sure enough, one night, Galen uses one of those passages and marks himself as a creepy Gothic romantic anti-hero. So there's that tradition within there as well. And some listeners even said that he had a vampire vibe, which I thought was intriguing.
Yeah, I didn't get any of that.
Yeah. Well, but it made me think, while we were having the conversation on Zoom, it made me think of Interview with a Vampire. These rich vampires from Louisiana, and they're gay. In this case, Galen's Black. And those came out around the same time. Interview with a Vampire was so hugely popular. I mean, you've listened to some interviews with Beverly, and that hadn't come up as an influence.
I've heard her say two things about the Galen character: that she wanted an over-the-top romance hero that had a purpose. Because he had all this money, but he was also doing something very risky and very purposeful. He didn't have to be involved in that, but it brought meaning to his life. And that she also wanted to portray a Black character that was very interested in taking care of his woman, that her husband treated her that way, and that a lot of times men in books and movies, Black men in particular, are not portrayed kindly. So she really wanted that to be different for Galen.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the 90s, I remember so much news coverage like, where are the Black fathers? And there was just so much awful, stereotypical sentiments in the news coverage at that time, even, let alone books, right? So, yeah, so he is definitely wanting to take care of her. And so there's that constant threat between his ability to do so, even though he's strapping, has a lot of soldierly abilities, for lack of a better way of saying it, and he's filthy rich. Will he be able to take care of her in this world where no Black person is safe?
Right.
And where there is an active hunter on the loose, specifically having an eye out for her. So you just kind of wonder, like, eek.
Yeah, there was a part of it to me that I was very butt clenchy and I was on the edge of my seat. This guy, his character's name was Shu, who was out searching for people to send them back south. And that part was really scary to me. And the Underground Railroad, I have such admiration for people in history who helped with the Underground Railroad. And in this case, where they were located in Michigan, I would say a lion's share of the people who came through Hester's door were ending up in Canada. That's where they were taking them for safety, because that part of Michigan is very close to Canada.
Yeah, and especially, after the fugitive slave law was passed, people would just usually want to get up to Michigan or New York or someplace far away from the Mason-Dixon line. But then after that fugitive slave law was passed, it was Canada. Because who wants to mess around?
Yep, because you were always at risk to become enslaved again. Yeah, there was one thing that I thought might come up in the Zoom conversation, and I thought you might bring it up. I'm very curious if you think that the name Hester has any correlation to the Scarlet Letter.
I wondered about that at one point. What do you think? She's also marked. I mean, I know Hester from the Scarlet Letter was just marked on her clothing.
Right.
But Hester in this book is marked.
Yeah. She's physically marked. Chris was being a little bit cagey, but what her parents did when she was born was take a little bit off of the tip of her pinky so that this free sister, her aunt, when she came to look for her, would know that that was her because of that marking. So she was physically marked that way, but she was also marked with these blue hands. Right. So I've listened to several interviews with Miss Bev, as she is referred to in the romance world, and I've not heard her mention that at all. But if we had a chance to ask her a question, I would definitely ask her that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, because Hester, I mean, I think that is such a name in American literature. So I almost feel like you can't escape it.
Yeah.
Unless it's a family name. She chose it for that reason. Really good question. So during our conversation, in our year of exploring romance, one of my goals, and other readers, yours I know, is kind of figure out, like, what kind of romance do you really like? Because I haven't given romance in the past, anyway, a lot of focus necessarily. So some of the things that came up were that, how much sex is required in a romance book. We talked about different subgenres, and that some clean romances maybe don't have any sex. Where's the line between romantic sex and erotica? Those are some questions that came up.
Yeah. Also, like, coincidence. In order for the love interest to fall in love, often there have to be coincidences that seem a little bit too coincidental.
Yeah.
Or forced might be the right word. Or even this scene that Chris talked about Galen sneaking around the house at night. It was so he could leave a rose on her pillow, so she would wake up and see this rose. And it's like, is that sweet and romantic, or is that creepy? It depends on who you ask. So there's one listener was asking, or I think this was on the Goodreads page, not in the Zoom conversation. I can't remember. As a reader, is that kind of eye-rolly? Like, ugh, how could this happen, this coincidence? Or is that something that you should assume in a romance because that's how they fall in love? You have to come into contact with each other. So that was also brought up.
Yeah. And I know, I think it was Karen who said that she doesn't really like a romance where for the two people, there's only one person for that person.
Yeah. You find your soulmate.
Right. Or then that another comment was about that no one else found Hester attractive other than Galen. But then also that Shu guy, the creepy white guy who was the slave hunter, I say in quotation marks, who didn't bathe and had rotten teeth. He also found her attractive. So it's almost like the men at opposite ends both found her attractive. And then there's Foster, the guy she was engaged to, who just seems to be kind of a clueless guy.
I don't think she was unattractive. I think she was attractive. I think Foster had convinced her that she wasn't attractive, which is part of why she had agreed to this marriage with him that was like a marriage of convenience for both of them, but not a love marriage. You know, she was young, and I think it was Galen coming into her life and wooing her that made her start to grow up and see herself differently. She hadn't lived a lot of life.
Yeah, she hadn't had that kind of attention, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is fascinating. I just thought about Foster and how he also didn't have sex with the woman he does marry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So what's up with Foster?
Well, I think he was expecting to have sex with her, and then she was having sex with someone else.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe he didn't have the skill of Galen.
or any desire for sex, too. I mean, there is that.
Well, he said to Hester at one point that he had tried and Jeanette wasn't willing, and that's because Jeanette was already getting it on with someone else. Okay. She had her own plans.
Yeah, she was one of those just purely evil type characters, I suppose.
She hooked up with Foster because she needed an escape because she had been in another relationship that went south.
Yeah.
She was really in it for the money and security.
Yeah. So, well, the thing I liked about the romance is you have, to call it a meet cute, this is probably the most historically horrifying meet cute, you know, that it is a woman on the Underground Railroad who's a conductor nursing back a man who's been so beaten. So you have the meet cute, you have all the obstacles, you have the enemies to lovers thing. But then at the end, the bad guy does get his comeuppance, which is really good.
Which is the happily ever after in another form, I think.
Right. That's the dark side of the happily ever after is exactly. The villain gets his just rewards.
And I guess there's also like a millionaire's or wealthy man trope as well. And that's definitely in this. And Hester really pushes against it. And there's a lot of conversation in our Zoom chat about that, how that's not appealing to people, or is it appealing to people?
Oh, the whole millionaire thing.
So she covered a lot, I think, in this book.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and considering, too, that it was out in 96, I think the scenes with, like, Galen kind of observing her were kind of creepy for a lot of readers because it's just like, for me, that's not attractive to think about some dude watching me sleep. You know?
Some people thought there was consent issues, but I think for 1996, it was pretty good with the consent.
Yeah. I mean, Galen was just so arrogant. She didn't want to marry him. He's like, you don't think you do, but you're gonna. And he'll say something like, I think at one point he said, stop talking or you're going to make me angrier than I already am. And that was a big red flag for me. Because you also think too, like, well, if he's this wealthy man who gets what he wants all the time, is he going to be abusive to her once the initial spark wears off? But then you do get some backstory about his early life, and he did not have an easy childhood at all. Right. So it's not like he came from some plush life as a kid. He's had his hardship. That helped me see him in a little bit of a different light, but I don't know. I'm not really attracted to the arrogant, wealthy person.
Yeah, that's set straight a little bit by the lover and the other people in his life.
Yeah. Well, who knows? I mean, again, this goes back to Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen with Darcy, right? And Lizzie. Do you find Darcy attractive? I don't know. And do some men just need to be softened by the person who finally will make them not just be a player out there in the world? Yeah. And I wonder how that works with two men in a romance or two women in a romance or two non-binary people in a romance. It's kind of interesting to see how these sub-genres or tropes, I guess I should call them, how do the tropes work when you have different people, right, other than your stereotypical man and woman? Yeah. And it just becomes that they're people. There can be arrogant people in any gender, right? So yeah. But would it work the same way? We'll find out as the year progresses. We will. And that's why we really hope for those of you who are going to be tackling the bingo card that you'll, share some of your reads with us and how the tropes work or don't work for you personally or within the book. Because I think at the end of our conversation, for me, I saw the problems within the book in terms of reading it as a 1996 reader versus a 2024 reader. You can kind of see that even within that time span, there's been a shift in issues of like consent and stuff. Definitely from the 70s, right? From what we've read about, consent wasn't even on anyone's mind back then. But I think for a novel from that time period, I thought it was really good.
I agree. And she's also, not only was it written in 96, but she's writing about what a relationship would have been like way before then. So it's totally different in that way. I thought it was really good. I thought I learned, just like in any piece of historical fiction, I felt like I learned a lot and was putting the book down and going to read other things to learn about American history, which always works better for me. Learning history with some context is always better for me, even if it's in fiction.
Yeah.
I found the story compelling. I also was very glad to know that there'd be an HEA at the end. And we've talked about that a little bit, that for me, that's one of the pleasures of reading romance, is you just know that that's going to be there. And I really enjoyed it. I think it was a great choice for our first read along.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to say that in her author's note, Beverly Jenkins mentions that that man who sold himself into slavery, that actually happened.
Right. That was the spark for her writing the story. Yep.
Cannot imagine that.
No.
Not at all.
And there is a bibliography, at least in the back of the copy we're reading, which is the reprint from 2014. And there was also a mud pie recipe.
Indigo mud.
Indigo mud, yeah. Because they went out and played out by the water together in some of their early times, wooing each other, and made mud pies out of the dirt. And I made it, and it was delicious.
Nice. I look forward to seeing what else we're going to read this year. I was really excited to start with Indigo.
Yeah, so for housekeeping, just to let you know, on episode 204, we will announce the second quarter read-along. It will also be in the March newsletter. So if you're a newsletter subscriber, you'll learn about it there. And we can't wait. And also other housekeeping, there is a general romance thread on our Goodreads page, as well as a thread for Indigo. And those conversations are open 24/7 in perpetuity. Chris, did you go on any Biblio adventures?
Well, I did. The main focus wasn't Biblio adventuring, but Laura and I took a trip down to DC to see our niece, Abby, who is living there for the next few months or so. And it was great to see her. She's a great tour guide. So we went to several different places. I was super excited to finally make it to the Library of Congress, which was fantastic, even better than I imagined it would be. I mean, you see pictures of the gorgeousness of the Library of Congress. It blew my mind to step inside and to see it and to walk around and just be there. So that was really fun. I did, of course, also go to their gift shop, and I picked up a book, American Libraries, 1730 to 1950, by Kenneth Bryce, with a foreword by Carolyn Hayden, who is the current Librarian of Congress. Big book. It's full of pictures and, architectural drawings of various libraries. So I look forward to getting into this. I'm sure I'll be talking about it in a future episode. And then a cool thing is, look what I found. This is Margaret Fuller.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, it's an 8x10 glossy reproduction of one of the portraits of Margaret Fuller. It was $8, but they had a whole basket full of different reproductions. And I was like, well, I'm going to look through them. I was so excited to find Margaret Fuller.
Yeah, you can put it somewhere in your office since this is your year of Margaret Fuller.
Yeah, so that was super exciting. How about you? Did you have any Biblio adventures?
I did. I had several. So the first, Chris mentioned Substack. I've started a Substack page. It's ingredient1.substack.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. And I just recently had a conversation with Louise Miller, and she's the author of 2 novels, The City Baker's Guide to Country Living and The Late Bloomers Club. Both of these books take place in Guthrie, Vermont, which is a fictional small town If you are a fan of the Gilmore Girls, it reads a lot like Stars Hollow. And the City Baker's Guide involves a chef who had a little mishap at her place of work in Boston that involved a fire. And her friend lives in Guthrie, Vermont. So she flees Boston, moves to Guthrie for a period of time, and love and antics ensue and a lot of baking. And then the Late Bloomers Club takes place from the point of view of someone who's born and raised in Guthrie and running the local diner there. I had a great conversation with Louise about the writing of both of these novels, about her life as a professional baker and her meditation practice and how it informs her writing. We had a really great chat. And I was also talking to her about sugar. We talked about, in the back of both of these novels, there's a recipe, and we were talking about the recipe for burnt sugar cake with maple icing, which I made and was delicious. So if you head to my Substack page, there's a video with me talking about sugar. There is our conversation. I would love for you to check it out. I also did a virtual retreat with the author Catherine May. She's the author of 2 books, Wintering and Enchantment. Enchantment is just coming out in paperback. And over on her Substack that she calls The Clearing, which I think is such a cute name, if you are a paid subscriber, she offers, I'm not sure if they're quarterly, but every few months or so, she offers a retreat where you spend a day virtually via Crowdcast with her. And I did that this past Saturday. It was lovely. She took us through some meditation practices and also asked us to hold an item for 15 minutes and kind of observe it and write about it, which was really cool. And then, Chris, this really surprised me. She did a whole second session in the afternoon about money. And it made me think about, both of us have read some nonfiction books about money and, you know, how we want to look at money in our lives. And it was really interesting. And she started with a journaling question about your first memory around money. And she told this story of when her parents separated and her dad came to the house and just started taking things, including the refrigerator, and how that was such an impactful moment in her life and really influenced how she looks at money even today as an adult. So that was interesting. And she was kind of couching that conversation in the fact that she has become a successful author and has been forced to look at money differently and its role in her life and how to handle it and make decisions. So it was a really fruitful retreat for me. And if you're interested, if you've read either of her books and are interested in her work, I highly recommend you join her Substack. You can do it as an unpaid subscriber and as a paid subscriber. And there's just different things you can do depending on that. And then the other thing that I did, and this was one of those things that happened just one night when I was scrolling through Instagram and came across this little video that took me to a bigger video. I watched a video through Live Talks LA. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's available to the public, between Adam Grant and Jennifer Garner. Adam Grant is an organizational psychologist. I've learned about him, I won't bore you with the details, but through a client of mine. And then also when my son went to grad school, Adam Grant was a professor where he went. And this was about his new nonfiction book called Hidden Potential, The Science of Achieving. And he was supposed to be in conversation with the actor Rainn Wilson, and he canceled on him that day because he got COVID.
Oh.
So he just, on a wing and a prayer, I think he had met Jennifer Garner once in his life, reached out to her and said, is there any way you'd be willing to host this event and be in conversation with me tonight? And she said yes. And, you know, she's just delightful and funny. And so she scurries out on stage. She hasn't read the book. She read the foreword in the cab on the way over or something. But it was a really enjoyable conversation. I have a lot of respect for Jennifer Garner in her philanthropic life. She is part of Save the Children, which is an organization that does incredible work all around the world and in our country in the United States. So it was just a really heartfelt conversation and really interesting. So if you like Adam Grant's work, or if you're a fan of Jennifer Garner, either or both, and or, I think you'd enjoy it. So I'll put a link to that video in the show notes. And it was just a delightful surprise.
Yeah.
And what a scary thing to be all set with someone to host your live event at this huge venue and then they cancel on you.
Right. Yeah. And how nice to have somebody like Jennifer Garner, not just Joe Schmo.
The funny thing is they didn't really know each other. They had met one time, I think, Yeah. So
but just in terms of like keeping the audience happy. Yes. I mean, what a great surprise.
And he did keep it a surprise. They didn't know. They think Rainn Wilson's going to come out and he's like, so, it was really sweet.
That's so cool. I think there's, at least in this country, such judgment about people who have money, whatever level of money, that they're bad somehow or that money is evil. And I just think it harms us all when we think that way. I think it gets in people's own way with their relationship with money. And then I think some people don't think that they have anything to contribute because they're not a millionaire.
Yeah. Yeah. And are you talking about Jennifer Garner or are you talking about Catherine May, what I said about Catherine May?
Both, kind of. Catherine May, for sure, is talking about money and how we all look at it in our lives. I think that's so important. And reading like we have some nonfiction books about it to help us understand our own relationship to it. Also, then you mentioning Jennifer Garner, her philanthropic work, even if she wasn't the movie star and the very wealthy woman that she is, she'd probably still be out there doing philanthropic work if she were a middle-class person, say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and she grew up in, I think, West Virginia and has exposure and understands poverty. But I have admiration for it in the sense, too, that once you are making a certain amount of money, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. And she certainly chooses to spend her time giving back. And I admire that.
Just like Galen.
Right, exactly.
He didn't have to do what he did, but he did.
He did. That's right. Including wooing young Hester. So do you have any upcoming jaunts?
Emily, I had some beautiful upcoming jaunts, but my doctor put me on a week of house rest. So our wonderful day up in Massachusetts with Jenna Miller and her event at Unlikely Story, that got canceled for us, unfortunately, which I'm so bummed about that, which is one reason I'm reading her novel today. I thought, try to do a little lemonade out of the lemons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on Friday, I was supposed to be going to Mystic Seaport. They have an author event with historian and journalist Dr. Daphne Palmer Giannopoulos. I'm sorry, I'm probably not pronouncing that name correctly, but she wrote the book, The Pirate's Wife, the remarkable true story of Sarah Kidd, who was Captain Kidd's wife, who apparently was quite the outlaw herself and then a socialite, or she was a socialite, then an outlaw, then a socialite again in the late 1600s. So I'm bummed to be missing that event as well. But, I'll catch up on some of those pre-recorded events that I haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah.
Regarding the house rest, I'm totally fine. Everything's good. I just needed some healing time.
She just wanted some reading time, everybody.
Oh my gosh. Well, I spent hence reading Ethan Frome one day, Summer the next day, Jenna Miller today. We'll see what tomorrow brings.
Yes. No, but we're all sending you lots of healing thoughts.
Thank you.
I am heading out of town. I'm going somewhere I've never been. I'll be spending a week in Wilmington, North Carolina. I will be visiting with the gentleman caller's sister who's been down there for a couple of months. And she sent me recently a list of independent bookstores that hopefully we will go visit. But if any of you live in the area or have visited and have recommendations, please email bookcougars@gmail.com. I'd love to know what they are.
Very cool. Well, I lived in North Carolina twice in the past, but it's been way too long to make recommendations. But you're going to have a great time. Such beautiful country down there.
Yeah, I can't wait to get my feet in some sand. I'm ready.
Yeah.
That's perhaps warmer sand than we have here right now.
Yes. Our sand here is still a bit chilly.
Yes.
And very wet.
Yes, very wet. We've had a lot of rain lately. Do you have any upcoming reads?
Well, yes. I'm going to be starting Moby Dick on Friday. the Moby Dick Buddy Read. If you're interested in that, just let us know. Shoot us an email, and we'll add you to the Instagram discussion chat that's set up for reading Moby Dick. And then it's also Women's History Month. So I plan on starting, where did my book go? Women of the Anarchy by Sharon Bennett Connolly. This book comes out here in the States April 16th. I purchased it from the UK because I couldn't wait. So I'll be dipping into this. And this is about the Civil War in England after the White Ship sank. I read that book about the White Ship a couple years ago. So I'm looking forward to picking up on that historical time period in England.
Awesome.
What about you?
I am looking forward to starting Slow Noodles, a Cambodian memoir of love, loss, and family recipes by Shanta Nguyen with Kim Green. It's got a great cover. Thank you to Algonquin for sending us this copy.
Noodles,
Chris's favorite. There are recipes.
Yum.
And in the Out Now category, After Annie by Anna Quinlan. Oh, I loved this novel so much. And she's out on book tour. I would love to get a chance to see her. And then Becoming Madam Secretary by Stephanie Dre. This was one of the recommendations that Davina made on episode 200. And then The Unclaimed, Abandonment and Hope in the City of Angels by Pamela Pickett and Stephen Timmermans. That was one of the recommendations that Michael Kindness made. Sounded really interesting. So let us know what you guys are all reading. And if you're biblio adventuring, we always want to know. You can tell us on Goodreads, on social media, at bookcougars@gmail.com.
Yes, we'd love to get your emails. Thank you, everyone who's reached out over the years, sharing your reads, biblio adventures. It's so heartwarming to hear from you.
We love it.
All right, everybody.
Happy reading.
Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.